I had a stroke in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning, and my son didn't find out until 4 days later. Not because anyone failed to reach him, but because he saw the messages and chose not to open them. 31 calls from the hospital, 12 voicemails, 2 texts from his sister. He read every single one. I know because his phone shows read receipts. While I was lying in the ICU with half my face numb and machines breathing rhythm into my lungs, my son was closing a real estate deal in Scottsdale and posting dinner photos with his wife's family. The caption said, "New city, fresh start, no looking back." I didn't understand what that meant until I was well enough to think clearly. And when I finally did understand, it broke something in me that the stroke never touched. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old. I was a pediatric nurse for 32 years at Mercy General in Columbus, Ohio. I've held the hands of children who were frightened. I've delivered news that changed families forever. I've sat in waiting rooms with parents who didn't know if their child would make it through the night. I thought I understood grief and loss and the particular silence that settles over a hospital when hope begins to run thin. I didn't understand any of it. Not really. Not until I was the one in the bed. My husband, Robert, died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal, the way that particular disease always is. We had 41 years together, 2 children, my son, Derek, who is 40, and my daughter, Pamela, who is 37. When Robert died, Derek came to the funeral. He gave a eulogy that made the whole room cry. He said his father taught him what it meant to be a man of integrity. He said family was everything. People shook his hand afterward and told me what a wonderful son I had raised. He left 2 days after the burial, said he had a deal closing, said his father would understand. I told myself he was grieving in his own way. I told myself busy people process things differently. I told myself a lot of things in those first months that I no longer believe. Pamela lives in Portland. She calls every Sunday without fail. She flew out to Columbus the day Robert was diagnosed and stayed for 3 weeks. When I had a minor health scare the following winter, nothing serious, a dizzy spell that turned out to be dehydration, she booked a flight before I even finished telling her about it. She has 2 kids of her own, a job she loves, a full life, and yet she always answers. Derek lives 40 minutes away from me, has for the past 6 years, 40 minutes. After Robert died, the distance between us didn't close. It stretched. Thanksgiving, the first year, he came with his wife, Renata, and their son, Cooper, who was 9 at the time and the absolute light of my life. They stayed 4 hours and left before dessert was served because Renata's parents were expecting them for a second dinner. I wrapped up pie for Cooper to take with him. He hugged me at the door and whispered that he wished they could stay longer. I told him, "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Christmas that year, Derek called 3 days before to say they were doing the holidays in Scottsdale with Renata's sister. "It's just easier with Cooper's schedules. It's icky," he said. I said, of course, I understood. When I hung up the phone, I sat in the kitchen. Robert and I had renovated together in 2009. The kitchen with the blue tile backsplash he spent 2 weekends laying by hand, and I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. Then I washed my face and called Pamela, who stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. The second year was quieter. Derek remembered my birthday with a gift card sent through an app, a restaurant I don't go to. I thanked him genuinely because that is who I am. The third year, he forgot entirely. His assistant sent flowers 3 days late with a card that said, "Thinking of you," in generic script. I put them in a vase and didn't say a word. I want to be careful here because I am not a woman who believes in self-pity. I spent 32 years in pediatric nursing. I have seen real suffering. I know what it looks like. What I felt wasn't suffering. It was a slow, quiet erosion. The way a riverbank wears down, not from floods, but from ordinary water, moving in the same direction, year after year, until one day you look up and the shape of the land has changed entirely, and you can't quite remember when it happened. That Tuesday morning in September, I was making coffee. I remember the particular smell of it. The way the early light came through the window over the sink and landed on the blue tile in a long, pale stripe. I remember thinking I needed to water the plant on the windowsill. Then there was a sound like rushing water inside my skull. And the mug was on the floor, and I was on the floor, and I couldn't make my right hand do what I was telling it to do. My neighbor found me, Dorothy. She's 73, walks her dog past my house every morning at 7:15 without fail. She saw the front door slightly ajar. I must have unlocked it earlier and not fully closed it. And something made her knock. When I didn't answer, she pushed it open and found me on the kitchen floor. Dorothy called 911. She rode in the ambulance with me. She held my hand. At the hospital, the ER team moved. with the kind of controlled urgency I recognized from my own career. Ischemic stroke, left hemisphere. They administered the clot-dissolving medication within the window. They were efficient and kind and professional. A nurse named Teresa asked if there was family to contact. Dorothy gave them Derek's number from my phone. She gave them Pamela's number. Then she sat down in the waiting room and didn't leave. Pamela answered on the second ring. She was on a flight to Columbus by noon. Derek's phone rang 31 times over 4 days. The hospital called. Dorothy called. Pamela called and texted and called again. His read receipts confirmed receipt of every message. He did not pick up once. I wouldn't learn any of this until I was conscious enough to ask. The first face I saw when I opened my eyes was Pamela's. She looked exhausted in the way only people who have been frightened look exhausted, not tired from lack of sleep, but hollowed out from too much worry. She was gripping my left hand, the one that still worked properly, and when my eyes opened, she made a sound I had never heard from her before. A sound that was relief and grief, and 3 days of held breath, all releasing at once. "Mom, she said, just that, Mom. I tried to speak. My words came out slower than I intended, slightly tangled, the way they warned me they might for a while. I asked for water. Pamela held the cup. I drank. I asked where Derek was. Something crossed her face that she was trying to hide. She is not as good at hiding things as she thinks she is. I taught her everything she knows after all. He's been hard to reach, she said carefully. How long have I been here? 4 days. I looked at the window. The light suggested afternoon. I counted backward in my head, slowly, carefully, the way I was doing everything now. 4 days. He knows, I said. It wasn't a question. Pamela set down the cup. Yes, she said. He knows? She pulled out her phone and showed me the read receipts. She showed me the timestamps. She had documented everything the way our father always taught us to document things, carefully, without drama, just the facts. 31 hospital calls, 12 voicemails, her own texts, sent and read but never answered. Then she scrolled to Instagram and showed me what Derek had been doing instead. The first photo was a rooftop dinner posted the evening of the day I collapsed. Derek and Renata and 2 other couples, wine glasses raised, the Scottsdale skyline behind them lit up gold and pink in the sunset. Celebrating the Hendricks deal. Hard work pays off. The next morning, a golf course. Midday, a spa. The following day, Cooper at a resort pool, splashing in the shallow end, his face a perfect oval of happiness. Caption? This kid, my whole heart. Renata posted the same photo with a heart emoji and tagged the resort. My grandson, 10 years old now, at a resort pool 40 minutes from the hospital, where his grandmother was fighting to regain the use of the right side of her body. Pamela watched me read through all of it. She didn't say anything. She is good at knowing when words aren't what's needed. When I handed the phone back, I turned my head toward the window and watched the afternoon light move across the ceiling for a long time. I was thinking about the nurse I had been for 32 years. I was thinking about all the times I had sat with families in rooms exactly like this one and watched them hold each other together. I was thinking about Robert, who in 41 years never once failed to answer when I called. And I was thinking, with a particular clarity that comes from nearly dying, about the pattern I had refused to see. It didn't start with the stroke. It started long before. I just kept reclassifying it. Every missed birthday, every holiday, redirected to Renata's family. Every school event of Cooper's I wasn't told about until afterwards. Every phone call that went to voicemail and wasn't returned for days. I had filed each of these things under he's busy, and people grieve differently, and I don't want to be a burden. What I hadn't let myself file them under was what they actually were, a consistent, deliberate choice to place me at the very bottom of any list that mattered. I had not been a burden to Derek. I had been an inconvenience. There is a difference, and it took a stroke to help me see it clearly. Dorothy came to visit on day 5. She brought a thermos of the peppermint tea she knows I like and sat in the chair beside my bed like she'd been sitting in chairs beside my bed her whole life. She is not a dramatic woman. She has buried a husband and survived a bout of breast cancer and raised 3 children largely on her own after her divorce, and she carries all of it with a kind of practical steadiness I have always admired. She told me she had called Derek herself that first day, that she had left him a voicemail explaining clearly what had happened, which hospital, which floor, what the doctors had said. She used her nurse voice, she told me, the one she knew I would recognize, direct and specific and impossible to misinterpret. He had not called her back. Then she told me something else. About 3 weeks before my stroke, Derek had called her. I looked at her over my tea. He called you? Out of the blue, she said. We've spoken maybe twice in the years you've lived next door. He was very pleasant, very concerned. She paused. About your driving. My driving. He wanted to know if I had noticed anything, confusion at traffic lights, getting lost on familiar routes, whether I had seen anything that worried me. She set down her own cup carefully. He asked me not to mention the call to you. I was quiet for a moment, processing this. What did you tell him? I told him you drove me to my ophthalmology appointment in July and navigated there and back without so much as checking the GPS. I told him I had never once seen you confused or disoriented. She looked at me directly. I told him you were one of the sharpest people I knew, and that if anything ever actually concerned me, I would speak to you directly rather than going around you. How did he respond? He thanked me politely and changed the subject to the neighborhood HOA of all things. Then he said he was just being a cautious son and hung up. I thought about that. A cautious son. A cautious son who couldn't answer 31 calls over 4 days when his mother was in the ICU. Pamela arrived while Dorothy was still there. The three of us sat together in the afternoon, and I watched my daughter pour tea for my neighbor, and I felt something settle quietly in my chest that had nothing to do with the stroke. Whatever had been lost in the past 3 years, whatever had been slowly worn away, was not everything. There was still this. There was still Pamela and Dorothy and the peppermint tea and the particular quality of afternoon light in a hospital room when you are alive to see it. On the 7th day, my friend Helen came. Helen and I worked together at Mercy General for 20 years. She retired 2 years before I did, and we have met for lunch on the first Friday of every month since, without exception. She brought me a word puzzle book and a bag of the sour gummy candies she knows I secretly love and pretend not to. Helen does not soften things. It is one of the qualities I have valued in her for 20 years. Derek called me, she said, before she had even fully sat down. I looked at her. 2 weeks before you collapsed, asked me about your memory, your orientation, whether you'd seemed different lately. She opened the gummy candies and held the bag toward me. I told him you had beaten me at the New York Times crossword on Friday and corrected my medical terminology twice at lunch. I told him if you were declining, I hoped to decline in exactly the same direction. He asked you not to tell me. He did. She met my eyes. I'm telling you. 2 women, 2 phone calls, the same questions, asked in the same careful, concerned son tone, with the same instruction attached at the end. Don't mention this to her. I lay in that hospital bed and I let myself see what I had refused to see. This was not a son who was too busy. This was not a son who grieved differently. This was a son who had been laying groundwork, who had been making calls, gathering impressions, building a portrait of a mother who was slipping, confused about dates, uncertain behind the wheel, perhaps not quite safe living alone in that house. That house. Robert's house. The one with the blue tile backsplash and 41 years of a life built inside it. I asked Pamela to go through my mail when she stopped by to water my plants. I told her to bring anything unusual. She came back the next morning with an envelope. The return address was Willow Creek Senior Living, a facility 20 minutes from my house. She handed it to me without a word and watched me open it. Inside was a brochure, professional photographs of elderly residents in bright, cheerful spaces, doing watercolors and playing cards, and eating in a dining room that looked like a hotel restaurant. Premium assisted living, memory care services, compassionate support for seniors navigating cognitive changes. Tucked inside the brochure was a preliminary inquiry form. Someone had partially filled it out. Resident name, Margaret Okafor. Age 68. 4 boxes beneath a section labeled Reason for Inquiry. All 4 checked. Memory concerns, confusion, and disorientation. Unsafe to live independently. Family unable to provide adequate care. I read each checkbox slowly. I had been a pediatric nurse. I had spent 32 years keeping careful records because records matter, because details matter, because the difference between accurate information and inaccurate information can be the difference between the right treatment and the wrong one. I had never in 68 years of living been confused or disoriented. I had passed my driver's renewal without difficulty 8 months ago. I managed my own medications, my own finances, my own household, with the same competence I had brought to every other aspect of my life. Every box was a lie. Each lie was in my son's handwriting. The emergency contact line at the bottom read, Derek Okafor. His cell number, neatly printed. The postmark on the envelope was dated 9 days before my stroke. I held the envelope in my left hand, my good hand, and I looked at it for a long time. Pamela sat very still beside me. She had already seen it, I realized. She had read it in my kitchen before she brought it to the hospital. She had given herself time to be furious on my behalf so that she could sit here now without showing me how angry she was, because she knew I needed to process this myself. That is the kind of daughter she is. I thought about the house. The equity that had built up over 4 decades in a neighborhood that had changed considerably since we moved in. I thought about Robert's life insurance payout, which I had invested carefully, and which my son had asked about, casually, twice in the past year. I thought about my pension, my savings, what a facility like Willow Creek would cost monthly, and what would happen to those assets once I had signed papers declaring myself unable to manage my own affairs. I was not angry in the way I might have expected. The anger was there, but it was quiet and clear, not hot. It felt less like a fire and more like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a long time. Everything I was seeing had been there before. I simply hadn't been willing to look. I called my attorney from the hospital room. Her name is Carol Simmons. I have known her for 15 years, since she handled the closing on the house Robert and I bought together, since she drafted Robert's will, since she walked me through the estate process after he died. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Margaret," she said when I had explained what happened. "I'm so sorry about the stroke. How are you feeling?" "Clearer than I have in some time," I told her. I explained the rest, the 31 unanswered calls, the inquiry form, the questions to Dorothy and Helen, both asking not to be mentioned. Carol listened without interrupting, which is one of the many reasons I have always trusted her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I've seen this before, not often, but more often than it should happen." A pause. "What would you like to do?" "I'd like to change my will," I said, "completely. How soon can you come in?" "I'm discharged in 3 days. I'll have a draft ready." When Pamela drove me home 4 days later, the house looked exactly as it always had. Same blue tile, same photographs on the hallway wall, same coffee maker on the counter where I had stood on a Tuesday morning when everything changed. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at it. Then I asked Pamela to make coffee, and I sat down at the table where Robert and I had eaten 30 years of ordinary breakfasts, and I thought about what I was about to do. I felt no hesitation. That surprised me a little. I had expected grief or doubt or the particular vertigo of closing a door you have spent years hoping someone else would walk through. Instead, I felt the same focused calm I used to feel before a difficult procedure, not the absence of emotion, but the steadying of it. Something that needed doing, done carefully, done right. Carol met with me the following afternoon. She sat across her desk and listened while I told her what I wanted. A trust for Cooper, $120,000 for education, managed by Carol herself until he turned 21, with no parental access, no parental oversight, no exceptions. Cooper would not suffer for his father's choices. To Pamela, the house outright, to do with as she wished, keep it, sell it, whatever served her best. 41 years of a life Robert and I built, left to the child who had always shown up. To Dorothy, $20,000 for being the person who found me on the floor and rode in the ambulance and sat in the waiting room and called my son and kept calling even when he didn't answer. To Helen, a smaller amount and the set of first edition nursing textbooks from my office shelf that she had always admired. To Mercy General's pediatric unit, a donation in Robert's name for a family comfort room I had always thought they needed. Derek would receive nothing. Carol reviewed everything, asked her careful questions, documented my competence with the same thoroughness she brings to everything. She arranged for a physician's signed statement attesting to my mental clarity. She had seen this done before. The adult child who had tried to build a paper case only to find the paper dissolved in court. Derek called on a Thursday, 10 days after my stroke. His voice when I answered was warm and rushed, performing the concern he should have felt 2 weeks earlier. "Mom, I just heard. I am so sorry. My phone was completely out of service. We were in a dead zone the entire time. I had no idea how serious." "Derek," I said. He paused. "I know about Willow Creek." Silence. "The inquiry form," I said, "with the 4 boxes you checked, the calls to Dorothy, the calls to Helen, the questions about my driving and my memory and whether I seemed confused." "Mom, I was worried. I was only trying to—" "The hospital called you 31 times, I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me." I know your phone was working because I can see when messages are read. You read everyone. Another silence, longer. We should talk about this in person, he said. Finally, the warmth dropped out of his voice. Now he sounded like what he was, a man recalculating. We will, I said. I'd like you to come to Carol Simmons' office next Friday, 2:00. There are some estate matters I want to go over with you. A brief pause. Then, carefully, of course, whatever you need, Mom. He arrived at Carol's office in a charcoal suit with a tie I didn't recognize. Renata was not with him. He had left Cooper in school, which I had expected. He walked in with the measured confidence of a man who believed he was coming to review documents that would eventually benefit him considerably. He stopped when he saw Pamela sitting beside me. What is she doing here? She's here because I asked her to be, I said. Sit down, Derek. He sat. He glanced at Carol's folder. He glanced at me. His expression was careful, managed, the face he wore in professional settings when he was deciding how to play a room. I did not give him time to play anything. I placed the Willow Creek brochure on the desk between us. I placed beside it the printed call logs from the hospital. 31 calls, time-stamped, all the dates and times aligned neatly down the page. I placed beside that the screenshots Pamela had taken of his social media posts, with the timestamps showing he had been celebrating a real estate deal and posting resort photos while those calls went unanswered. He looked at the documents. He did not touch them. I want to understand something, I said. When you checked the box that said I was confused and disoriented, what were you thinking would happen next? Mom, that form was preliminary. I was exploring options. I was trying to be responsible about your future. You were trying to establish legal grounds to remove me from my home, I said, so you could access the equity. That is what you were doing. His jaw tightened. That is not... You called my neighbor and my closest friend, asking them to corroborate a decline that doesn't exist. You mailed an inquiry form to a memory care facility 9 days before I had a stroke. While I was in the ICU, you read 31 attempts to reach you, and you chose deliberately not to respond. I let the silence sit for a moment. I was a nurse for 32 years. I know what it looks like when someone is building a case. I built a few myself, when children came in with injuries that didn't match the explanation offered. That landed. I watched it land. I also know, I continued, that you assumed I would not find out. That Dorothy and Helen would keep the calls to themselves. That I would recover from the stroke, find the brochure in my mailbox, feel frightened and grateful for your involvement, and sign whatever you put in front of me. You're making this sound like something it isn't. Then explain it to me, I said. Explain the 4 check boxes. Explain the 2 phone calls to my friends, asking them not to tell me. Explain 31 unanswered calls. He tried. He talked about concern, about long-term planning, about the difficulty of watching a parent age, about how the stress of Robert's death had affected the whole family. He said things that might have sounded reasonable to someone who hadn't seen the timestamps. He said things that might have moved me once when I was still reclassifying everything. I was not reclassifying anymore. When he finished, Carol opened her folder. She read the new will in full, in the measured professional voice she uses for exactly this kind of moment. Cooper's trust, the house to Pamela, the bequests to Dorothy and Helen, and the hospital. Derek's name appeared once in the line that specified he would receive no part of the estate for reasons documented and witnessed and legally airtight. The room was very quiet. Derek stood up. His face had moved through several expressions and arrived at something cold. You'll regret this, he said. When you need someone and Pamela is 3,000 miles away. Dorothy is next door, I said. Helen has lunch with me, the first Friday of every month. Pamela answers every time I call. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, this man who had given a beautiful eulogy about integrity and family, and the things his father had taught him. I have people, Derek. I've always had people. I just spent too many years trying to make sure you were one of them. He left without another word. The door closed behind him, with a sound that was very ordinary for something so final. Pamela reached over and took my hand. Carol gathered her papers. Outside the window, Columbus was doing what it always does in October, going gold and amber and rust, the light dropping earlier, the air beginning to carry the particular cold. That means winter is not far off. I thought about the blue tile in my kitchen. I thought about Robert spending 2 weekends laying it by hand, because I had admired a photograph of it in a magazine and he wanted me to have the thing I admired. I thought about Cooper at the pool in Scottsdale, not knowing his grandmother was in a hospital. Not knowing because he had not been told. That was not his doing. He was 10 years old and entirely innocent of all of it. 3 weeks after the meeting, Dorothy knocked on my door with Cooper beside her. I stood in the doorway and looked at him. Robert's jawline, my eyes, this perfect combination of people I love. This child who had no idea what had happened between the adults and his family. He was holding a card he had made himself, construction paper folded in half, his handwriting across the front in red marker. Get well, Grandma. I missed you. I took the card, and I read it twice, and I did not try to hold myself together. I had earned the right to cry in front of my grandson. We spent the afternoon making the sugar cookies he has loved since he was 4. He told me about school, about a book he was reading, about how he had learned to do a flip turn in swimming. He asked if he could come back next weekend. I said yes, absolutely, every weekend you want to come. Dorothy had arranged it. She had called the school, spoken with Cooper's teacher, who had spoken with Cooper, who had been asking about me for weeks. The logistics of how he got there, and whether Derek had been informed, Dorothy and I did not discuss. Some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. That was 6 weeks ago. Cooper has come 4 more times. Pamela calls every Sunday. Helen and I have resumed our first Friday lunches at the same diner we have gone to for years, where the waitress already knows our order. I have been cleared to drive. My speech has fully returned. My right hand is slower than it was, but functional. And the occupational therapist tells me I am ahead of schedule. I am going to Portland in the spring to see Pamela. My first trip alone in 3 years. I have a direct flight booked, a suitcase, already half packed in my mind, a list of things Pamela wants to show me. A bookshop, a garden, a restaurant on the water. I am not afraid, or rather, I am a little afraid, and I am going anyway, which is different. Derek has not called since the meeting at Carol's office. I check my phone sometimes, not hoping exactly, but not hoping either. That is the truth of it. You don't stop being someone's mother because they revealed themselves to be someone you didn't fully know. You just stop arranging your life around the possibility that they might eventually show up. People ask me what I have learned from all of this. I am a practical person. I think in terms of what is useful and what is not. So here is what I have found useful. The people who love you answer the phone, not every call, because life is complicated and everyone misses calls. But they answer. They call back. They let you know they saw the number and they're sorry they missed it. Love is not a feeling that happens to you. It is a practice you either do or you don't. After 32 years of nursing, I have come to believe that most things worth knowing can be seen in the small, repeated actions of ordinary days. Not in eulogies, in who shows up to do the work. I spent years trying to earn a place in my son's life, sending cards he didn't acknowledge, asking about events I wasn't invited to, scaling back my own needs so I wouldn't appear demanding. I was so careful not to be a burden that I made myself invisible, and then I blamed myself for not being seen. That is not love. That is not family. That is a habit of self-erasure I learned gradually and can, it turns out, unlearn. The stroke took some things from me that I am working to recover. It gave me something too, though I wouldn't have chosen the method. It gave me the absolute certainty that my life is mine, that I do not owe my presence to people who choose my absence. That 68 is not a sentence, that the blue tile in my kitchen catches the morning light exactly as it always has, and the coffee still smells the same, and Dorothy walks her dog past my window every morning at 7:15, and some things endure. Cooper's card is on my refrigerator. It will stay there. To anyone listening to this who recognizes something in it, who has spent years reclassifying what they see, making excuses for the inexcusable, waiting for someone who has already decided not to come, I want to say this carefully because I mean it precisely. You are not too old to stop waiting. You are not too late to choose differently. You are not required to keep the door open for people who have already left through it. I am 68 years old. I had a stroke. I changed my will. I am going to Portland in the spring. It is not too late, not even close.